Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as ever, I'm joined by my good friend Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing very well, but I am very jealous, and I want mandibles.
Yeah. Well, see, I've got my, I've got a kettle full of boiling water and some salt to take out the infestation of ants that appear to be sort of swarming across the New Mexico desert. Yes, this week we are going to be talking about the 1954 nuclear terror film, Them. And them being some giant radioactive ants. So really, just to sort of we'll give a quick overview of this film from the beginning. The start of the film it splits into two, and we'll get into that. Is in New Mexico, in the New Mexico desert. Two patrolmen find a number of incidents that they can't explain, but all have sugar at them. People have been killed, people have gone missing. They then find a young girl, and when they're able to bring her round, she just starts shouting, them! They go back out to the desert using, which is a really awkward moment. They go back out to the desert and they find a hive of giant ants, which they take out with ease. But they find that two of the queens have actually escaped and headed to the coast, and they then chase further ants down in the sewers of Los Angeles. So that's it in a nutshell, really. There's other stuff that goes on, but we shall now get into it. So, Julian, from the get-go, what's your overall thoughts then? Just kick us off then on Them.
Well, I think this is a much more mediocre film than the last two. Obviously of great historic importance because it really, sort of starts the, giant monster sort of craze in the U.S. But I felt like it could really be edited down to about an hour-long movie using all the ant footage. Like, I love the ant footage, but it's like, look at the poster. That's what you're selling, I want the mandibles.
Weirdly, I felt the same, but I also felt like there were two films in this. And the first one is Tremors. Like, the first half is like is Tremors, basically, almost like beat for beat, like it's apart from and then sort of hits a point and changes. And the second one felt like Aliens.
Yes, I thought the Aliens thing too. There's a lot in Aliens that borrows from this.
Oh yeah, and a few others. I was like, oh, that seems familiar. And this film has some of my favorite tropes of sort of like sci-fi and horror that you just know won't happen in real life. We'll get into, but I agree that I enjoyed this film. It's pretty good fun and there's some interesting stuff in it, but it felt a lot swifter in its sort of storytelling. And
what do you mean by swifter?
Well, it sort of just races through things. It's sort of like, and then this happens, and then we find them, and then we kill them, and then we move on to this bit, and then it's like, it's nothing ever feels like a major threat at any real point. Like the stakes always feel, although they keep trying to build up the stakes, they seem to deal with things relatively easily.
Yeah, that's true. Although you do see a bunch of guys get killed in the climax. I don't know. I mean, look, Aliens has the same problem. I mean, I think this does a better job, frankly, than Aliens does. The number one problem I have with Aliens is like, one of them was a massive problem in the first one, which is a great movie, and now it's just like they're stormtroopers just getting mauled left and right, and I don't care about them anymore. I'm not scared of them. Yeah, they are sort of slow. They don't, they don't do an awful lot. But that wasn't my objection. I felt like, it was just a little slow with all of the character scenes, and it takes about 25 minutes before you see an ant,
Mm-hmm.
and then you really don't see another one until this bit on the ship, and that's a very brief scene which I love. I mean, I just am in love with the ants smashing through the glass and whatnot. It's fantastic. And then I like the climax, but I want to see human on ant action.
It's clear they were limited in their special effects budget for this, and had a limited number of ants, to do this stuff. And it's holding back, isn't it? It's sort of that thing of like, well, we'll have specific beats throughout the film where we'll tell you, and it's quite good, but the rest of the time, we're not so sure. I'll be fair. I mean, you go into this film, it's a weird, it's one of those weird things that they do. And I suppose it's that sort of thing between marketing a film and making a film. Is this film's called Them, and like you said, everything about it is it's about giant ants. It's it's all over the artwork. It's all over the posters. Like you say. I mean, we're talking about sort of 70 years hence, but it must have been clear at the time. Yet the first sort of 15-20 minutes is a mystery.
Yeah.
They play it out like this mystery of like, what could have done this? What is it? It's played out as if like they've got to figure out what this these tracks are, and why is it sugar, and buildings have been pulled out instead of blown out, and all this other stuff. And it sort of feels a bit like you say, well, we know what they are. It's all been in the poster. Like, you don't have to tease this out in the same way. Yeah.
I mean, in fairness, I think that people of the era didn't know as much. I mean, movies were just fun to see, and people would go see movies and not know anything about them. I've done that based on a director or something, but and the other thing is the possibility of like double features, things like this where you don't really know all that much. But I do think like that mystery in the beginning, you kind of have to have, right? I mean, I guess you could just have a guy attacked by a giant ant right off the bat. I guess that's the way we would do it today. But, I mean, I feel like it's the sort of obligatory lead in. I just wish it were a little quicker. And I do think it works. I think all that stuff works. It's just that needs to be like 15 minutes instead of 25.
Exactly. That's my thing. Like, if they just sped it up a bit, I think it would feel less like we're dragging out this mystery. The one thing I would say is that I kind of like some of the characters in this. One of the ones is you get the main character, but like James Whitmore playing Sergeant Peterson, who's this sort of like patrolman out in New Mexico, sort of like becomes like the lead man in this. I mean, one of the things is there's no sort of real. One of the things we talked about is there's always like the love interest. They bring in the sort of like whoever, and that becomes between the FBI agent and this female scientist. But like Whitmore, sorry, not as in Peterson, sorry, Sergeant Peterson, just sort of propels through this film, and he constantly sort of has this look on his face of like. It's hard to describe. It's not like he's going to be there, but he constantly just doesn't seem to give a monkeys about anything anyone's saying. He's a bit like, oh, all right, well let's go take this thing out. And
he seems clueless to me. I don't know. The only character I liked at all is the female scientist. I mean, she's the only one that like I guess it's the only female character outside of like the mom who's looking for her kids. But I mean, at least like there's some design sense to her, and it's really cool watching again, sort of Aliens, right? I thought of Ripley when she's in the Queen's chamber with the eggs in the New Mexico bit. She is barking orders, and they comply. And I was like, oh wow, here's this. I mean, that's very uncommon for this era.
Well, one of the things I found about her, which I thought was really interesting, was it's a father-daughter relationship between her. So they bring in these two scientists. Once they find this track, they find like a track, and they send it off to the FBI, and the FBI go, "We don't know what it is," so they pass it on to this agricultural team or society, and you get sent these two sort of two scientists, and a man and a woman. It's a husband. It's a father and daughter. At no point, apart from at the very early on, does he refer to her as his daughter. And whenever he talks to her, he calls her doctor.
Yes.
And it's like, oh no, she's a colleague and she's a doctor and stuff like that. And I thought that was really interesting as well. There's no sort of like, oh well, you're my daughter and I must protect you or whatever. Like he's no, she's a scientist and she knows she's just as capable as me. And I thought that was a really interesting point as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I hadn't picked up on that. It seemed to me almost as if they sort of have forgotten that relationship. Like there's a line of dialogue that establishes that almost.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you could also see that as sort of like insulting. Like she's there because she's his daughter, and yet clearly is as competent as he is.
Yeah.
As time goes on. So I liked her competence. I like that she's addressed as doctor. She's not really a damsel in distress at any point in this movie, which is really, so to me, she's the only interesting character. He's kind of like there to give, narration and to say like, I admit the sketch of a anthill is crude, and it's like, it's like, well, the ants mutating could be the most logical conclusion. Like, it's like what?
One of the weirdest points in this film is you basically, as a viewer, get like a 4 or 5 minute PowerPoint presentation about ants.
Yes.
So well, these are common household ants. These are desert dwellers, and they're vicious, and this other thing. It's sort of like and then you get all this stuff, and you're like, I know what an ant is.
Well, see, I mean, I think that I had the same response to that, but I did like it too in the sense that ants are amazing animals. They're amazing critters. And it is true, like about warfare. I don't think, I don't know that it's true that only humans and ants, commit organized war. But certainly, the war making organized principles of ants is fascinating. So I don't mind all of that. It just does feel like there's no connection between that and the story. It's not like if we project this forward, they'd be able to lift, 20 tons. It's just it's a little disconnected.
It is. Well, and this is where that scene in particular is where I felt there's the disjoint between the two. Like there's two films in this story, as I say. The first part up until the attack on the ant nest in the New Mexico desert is a film in and of itself. It's Tremors. You start with the mystery of these people have been attacked or these people have gone missing, and then you get basically either you got Kevin Bacon or James Whitmore looking for the cause, and then eventually it's revealed, and it should be, it would be, remote New Mexico community under siege from giant ants. That's what I thought this film was going to be. And again, and that to me would have been, that's the first film. Right. And then it's like the sequel is like them two, or, whatever they want to call it, would have been actually that nest we attacked however long ago. 2 queens escaped, and we now know they've taken up residence somewhere on the west coast. And that then would then become Aliens, and then becomes your sequel. Like that's what that's how in my head that's how I would have set it up. So that's what I said. Like they seem to deal with this nest in New Mexico really easy, but it's again still quite cool where they've got like rocket launchers and they're doing all the stuff, and it's like but
the artillery is very funny to me. It's fascinating. That rocket launcher, they go through great pains of load. I mean, first of all, I was not expecting to go into the caves, right? Like the moment they established that, I'm like, oh, I want to go in there. And then they're like, we've got to go in there. And I'm like, yes, we're going to see that. Yes. But that rocket launcher I was reminded of like G.I. Joe cartoons. Like you see a guy load the rocket launcher, and then it just fires over and over again. And it's like, yeah, that's not firing ordnance. That's just basically a laser rocket launcher now. So and there's a bit of that. Like people have like, where did that machine gun come from? I mean, it's just like, it's like I've got a submachine gun. There's a little bit of that.
There's several moments where that happens. Like, say, at one point where he's got a pistol, and they've all got like a pistol, and then all of a sudden, like, the sergeant runs back to the car, and he's like, "I've got this semi-automatic in the back." He's like, that probably would have been a good thing to start with. Yeah, I don't know. There's little bits of this film I really enjoy. Like, there's even like the details, let's say, but that bit where they've got the rocket launchers is great. Like, it's like we're going to drive them back from the entrance, and then we can go in. And I'm like, this is all really cool stuff. Mm-hmm. And then they go in, they've got the flamethrowers, and like you say, she goes in with them and sort of like takes charge. And I'm looking at a watch and going, we're just under halfway through this film. And we appear to be in what I would consider to be the climax.
Yeah.
They're like, no, this is the first bit. But it is done quite cool. But it does feel a little breezy at that point. Like you say, it's sort of, this idea of, they've established already that they're like, these ants can do all this stuff. They're amazing. And sort of like, and they go in, they walk about 40 feet and they're like, here we are.
Yeah. I mean, there could be. Well, I mean, you see that ant get gassed. I mean, the idea is that the gas has basically taken out these ants. They've been smart, but they find a room that's been, protected from a cave-in.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then in that room, there's not a lot of conflict. I mean, I do think. But, don't forget, besides machine guns and rocket launchers, they have flamethrowers, even in that scene, which is awesome. Those flamethrowers look so cool. And I love seeing, especially later on, like the close-ups of the ant's face bursting into flames. It looks so good. So even though these are obviously, props, they do look good at times. And so there could have been more conflict. I will say that, or more stakes to these ant confrontations. Especially in the second half, that bothered me with the, like, gotta rescue those two kids. I mean, I really don't need those two kids. I mean, I was going to say that there is this phenomenon of movies sort of like not having enough material. And there are different solutions to this. One is to add a plot that complicates things. Basic Instinct basically is a great example of this, where really that is a 45-minute movie that then in the middle of it is like, but there's another suspect, and let's spend 45 minutes characterizing that, and before saying, never mind, that wasn't the case, let's go back to the original story. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's, a way of doing it. I think this idea is much better. And I like what you're saying. I think you're absolutely correct. And I wish that the Alien movies did this. I mean, I want, if you're going to up the stakes anyway, give me I like the Crying Games like this, where every one is a 3-act movie, but every one of those acts is feels like a totally different movie. Like the status quo is totally upturned, at the end of each act. And I really dig those movies. So, I mean, I'm not bothered by that here at all. Are you bothered by it, or?
No, it just felt like, and maybe it's because I'm raised on sort of like, a certain type of action, or like you say, Aliens, like a certain type of cinema, where my head's going. Maybe it's me as an executive producer or sort of like exec going, no, there's 2 films here. We got the potential to make more money. Make the first one about this and the second one about this. No, it works fine. I mean, one of the things sort of about it as well is, it's sort of they feel slightly disconnected but connected because you get the Sergeant Peterson carries on throughout the entire film, and it's like he's a New Mexico patrolman. Now he's working for the federal. Now he's working with the FBI, and at the end of the film, he appears to be leading the army, and you're just like, which is one of my favorite tropes in these films, where you sort of go, he's gone from this position to this position, and everyone seems to be okay with that. When we've even seen in sort of when Worlds Collide, when they're actually sort of questioning why people are in a certain room, would be like they'd be like, no, you've done your bit, thank you very much. And in fact, that would probably be the film. If anything, that would be the film today. He'd be closed out, but he's that rogue cop that he's the one that really knows where the nest is. That's the American Godzilla, isn't it? That's the Matthew Broderick one of sort of like, no, we know our evidence tells us it's here, and someone else going, no, it's here, and he's the one that's right. That would be the modern telling.
Right.
In the 50s, though, it's just like, yeah, come on in.
Well, I mean, it gets back to your point about action movies, and I mean, it's Die Hard, it's everything. It's that lone Ayn Randian sort of guy who gets it. This movie doesn't do that. It doesn't know that it's doing that, but it still does it. It just doesn't justify it by saying, I'm the one who has experience with these ants. You don't know what you're doing, Although the government is depicted as utterly, almost utterly, craven.
Yeah.
I mean, it is such a departure from the last two films. I mean, they're just like, yeah, ants were aboard that ship. We sank the ship. Screw you guys.
Yeah. They're merciless in this. I mean, some of the discussions they talk about when they find out they're in the city, it's pretty sort of clear that it was around that point that I started to think about aliens and the corporation. What would they say? The best thing, take off and nuke it from space. It's the only way to be sure. I'm like, if that was an option, pretty sure they'd have taken it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and they say, well, like, what makes you think those kids are still alive? Yeah, sure. I mean, screw those kids, I mean, honestly, but I think the meanest thing is that guy who is that Air Force pilot who was institutionalized for having seen a flying ant, and they totally butter him up and are like, yeah, we'll put in a good word for you to get out. We believe you. And then they go out and they're like, no, keep him in the institution. Make sure he doesn't have any visitors. It seems that is just so mean.
I do like that when they do completely double cross him though. When he's like, they are saying like, yeah, no, we really appreciate everything you've done for us and thank you for your information and you've been really helpful. Yes, we'll help you get out of it. And the moment he's at the room, they're like, no, you lock him up. We don't want him talking to the public. We don't want this getting out, and we'll let you know at some point in the future if and when you can let him out. Yeah, it's really sort of a bit like, I mean, it's probably accurate in many ways, but
see, I don't know about it.
In the film.
It seems gratuitous to me. Like, first of all, everybody at this institution is like, he said what? Like, the guy who works at the institution is clearly shocked by this. Clearly, this has nothing to do with his medical diagnosis, and it's just about covering something up. And it seems that guy is so desperate. He's in an institution, for God's sake. That guy is so desperate to get out. Just saying, we believe you. You need to keep this quiet while we handle this. Would be so easy. That guy would be grateful to keep it quiet. You've actually made it a bigger story by, by having an entire institution basically gossiping about like, why is the government so keen on covering up this story? And then they wind up telling everybody anyway. Nobody calls that institution. If you can take a patrolman from New Mexico and integrate him with you, why can't you take an Air Force pilot?
He's dealt with the flying ants. Like he's dealt with a different element. You'd want him on board,
Yeah, sure.
I also like the fact that you say they're so willing to speak to so many people because they do go see the really crazy person as well, who's like, make me a sergeant, give me the booze. Make me a sergeant, give me the booze. And all of a sudden he's like, "Oh, I've seen them out the window. I've seen these things out the window." And I know you've got to progress the plot, but it does seem like this massive coincidence when they're like, "Oh no, they've been crawling up and down the LA River."
Yeah.
Nobody else has seen them at night, and so it just so happens he can see them from his bed window. So that whole bit felt a bit, and this is what I'm saying about being swift, where it's sort of like it's breezy. It's like, right, we need to move to this next bit. Do this, move on, and it's sort of then because then all of a sudden they're in the LA River and they find that plane, the toy plane,
Right.
and they're like, oh, this only children or whatever play with these types of toy planes, and then it just so happens that they find the entrance where the boys have been taken, and then there doesn't seem like any effort put into any of the detective work.
Well, that's true. I mean, ultimately, you're gonna have some tip, right? I mean, if somebody is on the banks, walking along the banks, and sees some ants below, right? I mean, it does say they mostly come out at night.
Mostly,
but
that
was
like an alien. When he said that, he's like, when he said they come out at night, that was another alien thing to me. I'm thinking that's like Newt. That's a real.
Yeah. I mean, I do think Alien, especially Aliens, owes a lot to this. And I think that Queen's Chamber visually is so similar to the Queen's Chambers in Alien.
Yes, definitely. Well, again, like I say, one of the weird things is you see they bring out the full might of the army on this, and then they go into the sewers, and it's basically like 12 guys.
Yeah.
Which I sort of understand because you're underground and other stuff, but
well, you see at least like 3 different Jeeps, right? And you can kind of imagine that there's more Jeeps behind them, but there's only so many. First of all, it's a budgetary thing, obviously, but also like, how many guys can you sweep through the sewers with, right? Like 2,000 guys are just going to be standing behind each other, going like, move forward there, so we can get into a chamber with a machine gun. They're going to be useless.
But that's the thing I felt about with the ending. It felt a little bit unmanaged because that's pretty much what happens. Is they go into the sewers and they walk into the tunnels, and then basically it's there's an attack and it starts to sort of collapse a bit, and they're like, push forwards, and they can't really go. So it's like they've created this narrow space for all these guys to sort of like bundle through. And it's one of the things I was like, okay, is this going to be where we're going to have a reveal? And maybe I was second guessing it again because of my modern cinematic sort of experience. Was this is where this war strategy is going to come in. We found that this is a distraction, and it sort of is because they come in from the sides and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a tactic, and they're going to have this thing where they've been pulled in, they've been ambushed or something, and this is where we're going to find out the war that the ants are strategic, or they're actually using and that really doesn't really play out. And also, but I was hoping for something like that. That's where they're going to have to retreat, or it's going to be they get cut off or something.
Yeah, that would have been a lot better. I mean, that's a very good point, especially because they've set up how ants make war, right?
Well, I watched a PowerPoint presentation about it.
How dare you? I mean, that PowerPoint presentation, that is Chekhov's gun, and it doesn't go off. No, you're completely right, and that would have been a lot better. I guess, like, the awkwardness of, like, you say how things are easy. I mean, to me, they're just as easy in the present day. We were talking before this about Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Everything in that is just as easy. It's like, I know a guy in this area.
Yeah.
Okay, that's your lead. Let's go over there and talk to him. And you see that stuff all the time. So, I mean, I guess it would have been even easier for them to just, for you to just be like in a military compound and they say, right, we've gotten reports from LA that a few people have seen reports of ants. Don't worry, we've told them to keep quiet or something, And, all right, let's go to LA, to this river basin. That would have accomplished it just as well without visiting a second crazy guy. And that would have been even shorter.
Yeah, I think what I'd have wanted though is because I wonder how long the ants have been in New Mexico to be established, because it seems to be a single colony of about 4 ants. But like you say, there's going to be the gas is put off to kill all those. So when the queens escape, these young queens, it's to set up a new colony. So it's okay. It's only going to be a few ants, maybe, or whatever. And to me, I'd want them to. I picture it in my head again, maybe with modern special effects. I'd want someone to come across them in the sewer. Is there somebody? Is there a reason somebody's down there? Is there sort of like we've had reports of drains backing up, the streets are flooding, or there's something happening, or whatever. Right, we've got to go down. There's clearly a blockage. This is gross, and then they find out there's a bunch of there's a nest down there, and they're using the sewers like ready-made tunnels. Yeah. Which is pretty much what they're suggesting anyway. And I was like, okay, that's what I was, that's what I think I would have done in some way. Again, you get into the confrontation, you get to sort of, you can up the ante, no pun intended.
Reminds me of like you would have done that in like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes has that, where it's like,
yes.
We've just got like a 5 minutes like vignette here of like this is. I got reports that the sewers are plugged up. See, I'm going to investigate this. You hear the ants or the tomatoes. I mean, yeah, I would like that too. I'm more troubled. I think that's a great idea. I'm more troubled by how like they actually are using the LA sewer system there and filming in it. It looks really cool. I like seeing it, but then we find I can't stand the plot with the 2 boys. Like, how have they survived? It is kind of like Newt, right? Like, how have they survived? They look totally disheveled, but like the ants are right in the room with them. What is going on? And then it's a room.
The ants are attacking them. Yeah, the ants are attacking them and literally like cutting through pipes and pillars to get to them. And like you're saying, the kids are just like like stuck in this thing. And I'm like, how have they survived till now?
They get that deep into those sewers? I mean, like, oh no, we run in here. Oh no, the ants are chasing us. How did you get? I mean, it's a mile deep. They say that room. Yeah. How did you go? You walked a mile. You're clear. I mean, none of this makes sense. Why is there lumber storage in that room? It's clearly cut pieces of lumber.
These things happen, They you come across some lumber. You got somewhere to put it. You might as well put it under LA.
LA is weird.
Yes, yeah. But they're clearly just like I said, they are the propeller for the plot to go forward, and they do sort of localize it in the sewers. And I do kind of, there's little bits I like I say, when they are trying to do some of that detecting in the LA River, they're down in the basin, and they find a track, and there's some of the bits. It's like, okay, you're doing some work for this. But again, like it's sort of like, we found the exact entrance in in this however many miles of sewage system that happens to come out. Like, it all feels very convenient. And then they track them down, and it's sort of, they bring in the professor then just to validate, is this all of them basically? And again, you get to that what you said about the government. They're literally like, the end of this film is that they're like, is this all of them? He's like, yes, I believe so. I don't think they'd have got any further. Good. And then they just open fire with flamethrowers and machine guns, and that's pretty much sort of like coming to the end of the film. You're like, wow, yeah, brutal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but that's what I'm here to see. It's, I don't know. Like I usually hate the human plots in disaster movies, right? I mean, that first half hour to an hour these days, I'm just thinking, these are cliched characters, get onto it. I don't want any more, like, I get, I like the female scientist here. I shouldn't say the female scientist. There's a male scientist. So, But I like her character. She's the only one I like. But I don't need a love plot. I don't need any more. I don't need these kids. I want to see more. I mean, as you say, I want more with the ants. I want like more violence. We see multiple times where the ants grab people with their mandibles, cut to a close up of like, bags of gore, just being pierced. It's like, oh, he's tearing into my stomach. Of course, it's the 50s. They can't do this, but these days it'd be like, yeah, give me a 30-minute just gore fest of. I also thought of Starship Troopers, which we love. Give me just those insects ripping through people. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, the attack on the army base is what you want. The attack on the army base in Starship Troopers is what you'd want in them. Being swarmed by these things. Well, the main character even gets attacked, and I think he dies at the end when it's sort of like he survives all this stuff, and then he gets caught in the mandibles, and you're like, all right. Wow.
I think he's dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone survives getting caught in those mandibles.
No.
You're dead then.
Yeah. And that's quite a shocker. It's sort of like we've saved you for all this time. And it's not even like a heroic death. Like it's not like he sacrifices himself for the kids to escape. He just doesn't get out fast enough.
Yeah, he kind of he a little bit sort of holds it's one of those like I'll hold them off kind of moments, kind of, but it doesn't dramatize. Yeah, it doesn't.
No,
but that's okay. I mean, we hate those moments, right? I don't need a spotlight shined on like, you go ahead, I'll hold them off. No, he's just not fast enough,
Yeah, but at least make it. But it does not that either, though, is it? It's just a sort of like it's. I think it's a little clumsy. Yeah. It needs to be more dramatic. If it was, I'm saving the kids and sacrificing myself, I'd probably be more invested because it's sort of, it's less of a cliche in the 50s. But if it was, he's not able to get out in time, at least then make it more of a challenge rather than I appear to have got halfway up. I'm now at the X mark and the ant can come and get me at the right point in my waist.
But this is what I like about Starship Troopers is, no, just death is random. I mean, who survives in war has nothing to do with your skill. The bullet hit the guy next to you instead of you. There's nothing to do with your skill. And I can't stand Captain America, anyone, the pretense that, I'm such a skilled soldier. Okay, a little bit of that goes a long way. So you're right. You're completely correct. This is clumsy. This is not, they don't know what they're doing. That's absolutely true. Having said that, I love that it's random. I don't want them to shine a spot. I don't want it to be heroic at all. I just want it to be, he's got me, and I want it to be gory and horrible. And just what I want instead of the noble sacrifice is I want her reaction. As watching him be torn apart and just like, no, this is horrible and disgusting. Those ants are terrible. That's all I want.
Yeah, and I agree. That sort of should be the driver for a lot of this. I mean, one of the interesting things you say about that is about the ants being terrible. There's a speech at the end of this film, which again is sort of feels a bit tacked on, where he says about the professor comes in and then the FBI sort of says, well, these were, they don't know this, by the way, they're just speculating. These ants were generated by the nuclear testing in 1945 in White Sands, New Mexico. Mm-hmm. How many bombs have been tested since then, and what could have been created since? And then the professor's like, well, we just don't know. Man has now entered the atomic age, and we don't know what we've unleashed, and all this other stuff. And it's clear. I mean, this came out the same year as Godzilla, so let's not forget. Right. This is, which is worth noting. But it's twofold in this sense of we are, we have unleashed nuclear power is one thing. Obviously, that's the thing. But more than that, these two scientists have come across a mutation of a new species, and at no point are they, especially if they're saying, yeah, this could be the first of many. We don't know what else is out there. At no point do they stop and go, can we keep one for testing?
Yeah, I thought about that too. Like, well, forget testing. Like, can we drop these on an enemy nation? it does seem like the government is so ruthless, and there's a lot of talk about the savagery of the ants, especially in the PowerPoint, but or the documentary clips. But the government seems pretty savage here. So yeah, I had the same thought. They don't seem to have any thought except exterminate.
Yeah, and they are treated as a pest. But there was that moment of pause at the end where I'm like, well, you're now admitting that this might be the first of many. Like, you really should be doing some research on these other than, well, they're ants. And that felt a little bit, again, ill thought out. Again, you've literally drawn attention to something that you're not going to answer.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's the sort of like, look, we've often talked about how the movies just end, right? In this era. And it's like, okay, we killed the ants, we killed that nest, the end. And this does that too. But yeah, I mean, this is the sort of like obligatory, let's make sense of this. I mean, this is the freshman comp essay, right? Where, you just get to the end and you're like, here are some questions to make this seem open-ended and interesting, right? And yeah, you're right. It's totally the Godzilla thing. It's not as well done as Godzilla, but it is the sort of like, yes, here's the message, but also it's important, I think, in this era to suggest we're not giving you mindless entertainment. The Catholics are going to object to them. It's just violent entertainment. So here's our, thing to grow on. One to grow on.
Yeah, that we're not going to grow on it. And maybe that is the point, that there's this sort of tacked on speech at the end. I mean, you talk about the sort of, like I said, we mentioned this with Godzilla that came out the same year. And we both agree that Godzilla is a much better film. But also the thing with Godzilla is that national experience that goes with it. And I find that, with Godzilla, there's that sense of, the defeat and the trauma of being hit by these weapons that is materialized in Godzilla, and the sort of the rhetoric in that film. And in this film, it's more about there's no guilt to actually having released the weapons at any point. There's not a sort of thing of going, even the speech at the end isn't a sort of like, is this a Pandora's box that we should never have opened sort of thing. It's just like, yeah, we've done it. And, there's some stuff we probably have to deal with. But there's none of that sort of like, they never fit. There doesn't feel like there's a guilt for having done what has been done. And I don't know if that's sort of, again, yes, we know we did this thing. We dropped these nuclear weapons on another country. It brought a war to an end. And we did all this testing, but there's no sort of like self-reflection of, we brought one of, if not the most destructive force and dropped it on another country. There's no, this thing of like the ants are retribution for what we've done, or, they represent this, what could come out of Pandora's box. There's none of that. It doesn't seem as self-reflective. It's not supposed. It's supposed to be like a B movie kind of film, but I don't know. It felt odd that there was never that moment of even like a soldier or a general or someone saying sort of like, more than we have just entered the atomic age.
No, I think that's an excellent point and very well said. Right. There's no sort of Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer struggled more with. And really all of the nuclear scientists, with a few arch conservative exceptions, struggled terribly with what they had done and what they had unleashed. Here, and it does seem to me this is very American, right? We're the guys who won. And Americans are not known for their introspection, right? Nor are our blockbusters, right? Little bit of that goes a long way with us. America's experience is not Japan's. We're like, yep, you know what? Everybody wanted this. Everybody, even if the Nazis had given up on the atomic bomb, but despite a lot of popular culture, but certainly Hitler would have developed it and used it if he could. There was no moral compunction against this. The American point of view is like, hey, look, we're the victor, mother effers, you know. Like this door was going to be opened eventually, but you're right. It would be so. It seems almost willful because we have seen. I mean, those kids survived, but they were totally traumatized, you know, for life. Yeah. And their dad died and died not well. You know, he had his arm ripped off and his chest gouged, right? And they probably watched this. Like, they're completely traumatized. And, you know, there's no line like, well, you know, maybe those kids feel differently about all of this than you do, Mr. Scientist, with your glib thoughts at the end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it wouldn't take much just to put it in. But again, I don't think that's what this film is.
Right.
You know, but I wonder if there were films that did do that. Like we haven't really come across anything like that in the 50s. It's a very sort of, I don't know, sanitized is probably the closest word I could use. But they come later. Those films, a lot of war films have dealt with it, you know. But they usually come, you know, nowadays in a much quicker succession, you know, and there'll be some film, you know, following the Vietnam War. You get, I suppose, there's a whole host of war films that sort of like dissect the you know, the American experience in Vietnam, or you know, the post Gulf War, or you know, even 9/11. And that dissection and analysis usually trickles into other genres, and most often science fiction. You know, and it just doesn't seem to have, at this point, it hasn't really materialized with, we're going to get more nuclear monsters, and I'm sure, you know, there was a whole bunch, but like there's never that sort of retrospection of like, you know, oh well, you know, we brought this upon ourselves, sort of thing. Right.
Well, I mean, I do think that we get a little bit of that. We got that in the last film, you know, and I referenced like The Day the Earth Stood Still, right? I mean, there is some thoughtfulness here. It's not an era that is immune to all thoughtfulness. It is worth pointing out that it's right around the turn of the decade, 1950, where the Chinese Civil War resolves, and Russia gets the atomic bomb. I think it's like 49, right? So by the 50s began with this sort of, you know, fear. And you know, obviously, you know, there's the bomber gap and the missile gap and all of this as the 50s go on. But there is real reason to be scared. And the way that was sold to Americans was, look, communists outnumber you guys by like, you know, 10-1, right? Like a third of the world is already communist. Like they already control everything. We're outnumbered. We're the underdogs. Now, of course, America was never the underdog post World War II for sure. But we always, you know, I mean, you see this today, right, in the arch right kind of stuff going on, this sort of need to feel that you're the underdog.
Yes.
But my point is like the Cold War mentality of like mutually assured destruction, that had not set in yet, right? So the idea that we were going to die by atomic war and the whole, you know, world would be ruined, that was not an idea yet. People still felt, and we're probably right, that even in a full nuclear exchange with Russia, if their bombers could reach us, you know, they'd blow up some cities and we'd blow up some cities of them, and, you know, the world would go on, tragic as it was. And so it's really later, especially going into the 60s, that everything seems to reflect the mutually assured destruction thing. But I do think there is room for introspection, but I don't think that's what this movie is interested in. This is the superhero movie that's just like, No, it's just a guy with a cape who likes to punchy.
Yeah.
It's a giant ant dude, like, and I love that. There's total room for that, but it's not a movie that's interested in doing those things, and that's limiting. I mean, and ultimately the fact that it isn't interested in doing something deeper, and that it also, as you point out, sort of drags and is a little lacking in real threat from the ants. How easy it would be in those sewers to, as you exactly say, to have the ants burst in from the side, and you're like, oh no, they're using strategy on us. That would be so awesome, and we don't get that. So when you limit your scope like that, and then you don't deliver punchy like we've never seen, it's a little disappointing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. You're right in that sense of, like, I'm asking this film to do something it's not there to do. I mean, it'd be interesting if it was. I think it'd be, it provides that platform. But I think even at the punchy level, when it gets to the punchy, or in this case the shooty, although someone having an actual physical fist fight with one of these ants would have been interesting.
Yeah.
It's not bad. I mean, like I say, when it comes to the violence, I mean, there's a scene early on when they first come across, like, the first ant, and they're shooting at this, where the cop remembers he's got like a semi-automatic in the back of the car. He's like, oh yeah, useful. I like that stuff as well, though. And then one of the details I like, again, I'm not sure it's occasional, the goggles, and they get out and they've got there's like a sandstorm's going on, better wear these goggles. And I'm like, this is a really, like, I've never heard of this. And there's a great bit where the doctor has to put one on, the male scientist, and it feels like almost like it could have been an outtake, because the police officer leans in and says, oh, let me help you, and adjusts it, and then it's sort of like it's all lined up on his face, and he's like, thank you very much, and they move on to the next they move in through the scene. It was incredibly, it's the only bit of natural acting in this a large portion of this film, and I'm like, I don't think that was supposed to happen, and they've just kept it in. But again, the goggles are quite an interesting little note. Throughout, but again, like I say, the action with the ants is all good. It's the connecting bits that start, like I say, are just weak.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also noted the goggles thing is notable. It is strange that this stuff makes it in, and other stuff did not get in, right? Sort of character scenes. I mean, a lot of this connective tissue. I also noticed that when you first meet the female scientist, the daughter of the other scientist, she's descending a staircase from an aircraft, and she says, oh no, I got caught on the craft. And it sort of delays her coming out. And then she frees herself, gets her dress uncaught, and then descends the ladder. What was that in there for? It's like, it's that naturalism that you pointed out with the goggles. I guess those are, I mean, they're very weird touches, especially in a movie that does not show other things.
It's a weird moment, because I thought the same. And again, I was thinking, like, what's this for? And the only thing I can think it's there for is it's supposed to be sort of like twofold to me. Oh, she's a woman trying to get off a military space, a military aircraft, women kind of thing, which is bizarre, because then never comes up that she's incompetent or clumsy at all ever again. But the other point, I think, is like the thing that is out of this shit, out of the craft, is her legs. Mm-hmm. So you get this better, and it's almost like a weird, like, male gaze of the 50s.
Yeah.
The
voyeur moment. We have an excuse to, right?
Yeah. Today it would have been her bottom. Like, it would have been, the shot would have been shifted, and you would have got the bottoms coming out. You'd have had her ass and then coming down. That would have been the shot. That would have been the Michael Bay shot. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We both went there.
And that's what. But for this, it's the legs, because it's then for when she does come off the airplane and walks away. The FBI agent says to Sergeant Peterson. He says, she's a doctor. Do you think she's a medical doctor? And he says, because if she is, I'm going to try and find a way to get a fever this, right away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's clearly sort of like, it's a bit of bantery kind of AA, but it never comes across, mainly because it's to be sanitized. It never comes across sort of like too derogatory or it's not too wolf whistly is the way, because it's not directed at her.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like someone saying, well, if you were my doctor, you'd give me a fever. Do you know, if it was directed at her, it would feel awkward and horrible. But because it's between two guys, it feels a little less, a little less direct. But that's it. Like, it becomes a bit of a love story between the FBI agent and her. But it never, at no point does it compromise her. Like, neither does her father or the FBI agent say, you can't do this because you're a woman, or you shouldn't do this, let me do it. Like, it never comes up, which is, fine. But it feels, it's sort of good.
No, that's a very good point. And I think it is, in a movie that is not concerned with politics and not concerned with having any introspection, it is one of the deeper, more, you almost think like, was this an accident? They just didn't think about this. I mean, you're right. There is that sort of like banter. I'd forgotten. And, but you're right that it's pretty minimal, right? It's basically the equivalent of saying like, hey, I find her attractive, to another guy. Nothing wrong with saying that. Harassing her is a different thing. Saying it to her is a different thing. Nothing wrong with women say that, for that matter. When you introduce a scientist, or every single scene with Thor in it in any Thor movie. But the other thing is there is that moment where she has to go down into the caves in the first climax, and her father is protective, and she says, and they're very clear, like, no, this makes sense. You need somebody down there to do this. And basically everyone relents. And then she bosses them around. And they're very comfortable following. They're like, look, man, we're dealing with some giant ants here. You seem to know what giant ants are about. We are out of our element. Tell us what to do, scientist lady.
Well, again, like you said, even the logic of it isn't about her. He said, because it's about his experience to begin with, one of the most experienced. But then the counter is, yes, but you're also old.
Mm-hmm.
We can't be having you down there and risking you having to basically support you as well. She's the more sensible option, and that's sort of it. And it's dealt with, and then they go, yeah, all right.
Yeah, and I like that because the other thing is he doesn't seem that frail, right? Like he seems a little doddering with the glasses, protective glasses thing, but he doesn't seem especially frail. You don't see him tripping or stumbling into things. He's not some parody of an absent-minded professor or an old man. And I thought, haven't we seen Harrison Ford older than this doing action stuff? And here they're just like, no, it does not make sense for a man of this age to be going through these corridors.
This is one of those things that makes me laugh when you see these things. It's like, in Star Wars, when you sort of find out that like Alec Guinness was younger when he made Star Wars than sort of Mark Hamill is when he comes back to do, Last Jedi. And you're right, like, today I think there's a different thing. I mean, like those action stars of the 80s are still trotting out films of, varying quality, but still doing it and still capable. Age is seems to be like less of a thing now. But it's interesting to do this sort of thing. At one point she actually says that they're looking at things. There's another scene where they keep trying to show sort of this. It just reminded me of how not so much doddering, but like how much he does not give a crap about some of the stuff that's being done. So they're on the planes. They've got the two helicopters because they're looking for the nest, and they've got to talk through the headset. And the Peterson keeps saying to him, like, "You got to say over." He says over, and then he talks again. And he stops. And you got to say over and out. And he's like, "Oh, you and your rules!" Like it's usually the other way around. Like the scientist is going like, oh, this is so frustrating. Like, why have I got to do this? That the policeman takes it off him, he's like, over and out to complete the sentence. It's interesting that they're, you know, they've put these little character beats in for him, for this professor, but like maybe he's just doing it himself. Like maybe the actor was like, there's not much here. I'm going to keep doing this, and that, you know, we've only got so long to film this. They can't take them out. They can't stop me. I'm just going to keep doing it.
Yeah, it's almost like he's sort of chafing against the sort of military command structure a little. But you're right that he does seem to, I had forgotten that. He does seem sort of doddering there too. But again, all of this is so strange because it's like, what did they leave in? What did they take out? There are so many key moments that just aren't in the movie. You know, and in fact, they've gone to such great, one of the things that I found most bizarre is that they've gone to such great lengths to cover this up, including keeping a man institutionalized in a scene that I find just brutal. I mean, you know, it's just so brutal and unnecessarily mean. And then when it's time, they're like, oh, yeah, they're in the LA sewer system. Then they just casually make an announcement, just declaring martial law. And they mentioned like 2 queens escaped. And I'm like, I'm not sure that this has been established. That 2 queens escaped, one was destroyed.
That's the first time you are told that information.
Right. It's not, you know, the scientists don't know it. So now it's just like, oh, now we're going to tell the public 2 queens escaped. One was destroyed. Presumably that one that was destroyed was on the ship you saw.
On the ship. Yeah, that's what
But we've got to figure this out. Like the movie doesn't tell us that. And there is no conversation about like, you know what? It's time. We have to tell the public now. We just have to. There's no way to avoid it anymore. So there's like key connective tissue, including key facts like 2 queens escaped, that you just don't get. But instead we get this weird kind of banter about a character who's not really that interesting or important.
And it never amounts to anything. Like him chafing with the military never, or even the police, never amounts to anything. It's not like there's a scene where they're like, you know, he's like, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to have to, and your rules can't stop me. No, it never goes anywhere. So yeah, it all seems very, very bizarre. But you say about the information again, like you said, this film, that announcement, I'll get to that announcement in a minute. That really made me chuckle. But there's a great line where we've had like the mid climax, and they say like, I think it's time to talk to Washington. And there's a part of me going, I think when you first found this out would have been a good point to talk to Washington. And then I'm thinking, wait a minute, if you haven't spoken to anyone else, where did you get the rocket launchers and the flamethrowers and the gas? Like you must have spoken to someone to get all this stuff. And so yeah, there are definite gaps in information in this film. But that announcement, there's a great moment when this is, because it's given over, it's handed over, it's like a newscaster. And we see it on our screens as this guy sort of going through, basically giving this information. And then they basically have a scene of a bar or a restaurant. And it's presented to them and people are watching it. But as you say, it's so casual, as in like, you know, ladies and gentlemen, it has been announced we are introducing martial law, and everyone actually out on the street after 6 p.m. Will be sent home. And this is because giant ants have flown into the city and are now nesting in our sewer system, and the military are handling it. You go, boys. It's so sort of like casual that like no one stops and says, sorry, wind back a minute. Giant ants? Yes, but we're dealing with it. Don't you worry, boys. It's so bizarre that everyone just goes, all right. Like it's again, it's like, you know, if this was made today, you would have shots of like, you know, fleeing, that the obligatory shot of everybody trying to leave the city, the blocked roads, the people running. You know, something would happen that would then sort of cause the ants to attack. I don't know. There'd be something, but like, you know, the moment you institute martial law, is the moment you'll get that evacuation or something.
Also, like, you know, rioting. I mean, the other thing is, yeah, I mean, it does seem like a little bit of a sort of like news on the march. Like, don't worry, our boys are fighting the atomic ants in the sewers. Yeah, it is a little pat. But, I do think, like, if that happened today, people would be like, this is a myth. We're so prone to conspiracy theories. We can't even get people to wear masks. They spread disinformation that masks cause COVID. I mean, just the stupidest QAnon nonsense, brain dead stuff. People would say, these ants aren't real. And when the military gets into the sewers, they find scores of people who have just like broken down all the barriers. The ants help the ants escape. I mean, it would just be complete chaos. But of course, that isn't just. It seems worse today. But during earlier pandemics, they dealt with some of the same stuff. So yeah, I mean, the idea that we just listen to the military, that's not something. Let me put it this way: that's not something white Americans do or feel they have to do. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. It feels like you say that whole argument. Again, like you say, it almost feels like it's played for comedy. This one bit, because I expect everyone to sort of like to sit and watch this article or watch this news announcement and then just turn back to the bar and carry on smoking inside. It's very bizarre how they make this announcement. Everyone seems to do it, and then, like I say, it's just like, and now back to the military. And this announcement having been made, it doesn't impact anything. Never comes up again. And it's never sort of brought back to anyone in the city or whatever. I mean, it's clear that sort of it's that arse covering in a story that says no, we dealt with the public. We took this to a city and we dealt with the public by telling them to stay inside. So that's that. Don't worry about that. Move on.
We addressed that. Don't bring today. It'd be like, don't bring that up in interviews. Doctor Who does that a lot, where it's like, oh no, we addressed that in that one line of dialogue. No, you didn't.
Yeah, there was a passing reference to it, and it passed very quickly because nobody caught it. Yeah, it feels like that. And again, that is sort of fine. I'm happy for that to exist and to be the way it's done. But again, it's this thing of sort of like everything's a bit too swift. It's all a bit too breezy. It never really has an impact. Like, I would rather there be something where, like, it doesn't have to be massive, but like just have that be an issue where they're like, well, actually having, enforcing martial law in Los Angeles at this point is incredibly difficult. Like, we don't have the number of people to do it, or there's something going on, or I don't know, there's something that prevents us, or it'll be a struggle. Not just, well, we've sent out a news broadcast, everyone's seen it, it's fine.
Or even just seeing people react. Yeah, and again, this is sort of in my category of like what is shown and what isn't shown. And just very strange decisions. It's important to remember that sort of older male scientist is a little doddering. On the other hand, it's not important to have any idea how Angelinos react to martial law.
Yeah, it's a bizarre. And again, like you said, that's not the story they're telling. They want to focus in on the ants, and that's the story. And again, we've said this before, if this was made today, firstly, I think it would be 2 films, and the first one would be hour and a half, the second one 2 hours, and you'd have that would be a key point. If anything, it would be like Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. You'd have an organization in the second one that's trying to protect the ants because they're a new species, and what right does the military have to eradicate them? That there'd be that sort of thing, or like you say, as well as the rogue cop element, like there'd be something in there,
or like some parody of environmentalists that's like, maybe humanity deserves to die.
Yeah. Yeah, or look, which is basically the story of Kong, Godzilla, King of Monsters. Like, we've had our time. The Titans do this. You're like, wow, that's a ridiculous notion. Yeah, It would fall into that category of sort of like, eco horror is how I'd sort of see it. The thing of like nature fighting back, and we are being taught a lesson by Mother Nature. And again, like there's no talk of Mother Nature in this film. There's no talk of them being animals. They're just monsters. They're radioactive mutations.
Yeah, they're stormtroopers, right? I mean, they're just faceless to be killed, right? There's no moral compunction about killing an ant, or burning it alive with a flamethrower, right? So have fun.
Yeah, literally like firing jets of flame into its face. Like literally, there's no compunction. Yeah, you're not supposed to think of these in any way with any sort of sense of humanity or anything like that. These are they're aliens. It's supposed to be that thing, isn't it? Like you say, aliens. They're just stormtrooper aliens or whatever, and they are there to be killed, which is fine. And I wondered how well this would have done. This did in 1954. It's an interesting concept. But like you say, I think maybe because it's been done since and potentially better, but it also it doesn't hold water in the way that it did, probably in 54.
Yeah, I mean it's intended to be a good bit of fun. I don't think it takes itself too seriously. I mean, I'm all for that. I think most stuff that's silly, i.e., disaster movies, action movies, superhero movies, most of you can, and again, I'm not trashing those genres. There are masterpieces in all of those genres, but a lot of it is B movie stuff that takes itself way too seriously.
Yeah.
So kudos to this movie for not doing that. On the other hand, there is stuff that feels awkward, not thought out, strange in what it includes and what it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think this is the sort of the third of our 50s trek, and there's been a lot to talk about in the others. When we talked about sort of When Worlds Collide, there was stuff in there. We could really dig into it, and the same with it came from beyond. It came from outer space. Like there's interesting stuff to talk about there. Like. In this, if I'm honest, I'm sort of looking at the time I'm going like, I think I'm pretty much in the sense of like we may have just covered this.
I think so too. But there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I think that it's a fun movie. It is what it is, and that's fine. I do think that there's room for, like, clearly, one of the things I like about this, and I feel like this as a writer, is like. I look back on comics that I like, stories that I like, and I'll think, what I remember is the giant ants. Like what I remember is the giant ants, and wasn't there a scene with a guy like in the ant's grip, and he's staring, and you probably remember it as more violent and better. You remember like the flamethrower close-ups, fantastic, right? That's what you remember. I'm not going to remember any of the characters. Yeah. And I think there's room for that. I think that I like that. And I think that, there, even when we make more sophisticated stories, it's important with some similar plots, it's important to remember, like, really at its heart, we're justifying a story about giant ants. And we can justify it with a better plot and, do it more artistically and than this is, and in a more sophisticated way, and have a little bit of deeper meaning and whatnot, and justify it and make it good. But at the end of the day, like, it's okay to be thrilled by giant ants and have that be the main attraction.
Yeah, it is. It's good fun. Yeah, no, I think you're right. This before we even started, I sort of mentioned I'd watched Kong versus Godzilla, and I've watched this modern cycle of Godzilla films, and I've watched a lot of the other Godzilla films. And it's that thing of you don't have to justify them, with a thing. We really like that first Godzilla film, and it has themes. It's making a point. It has an objective. After that, they become something different, and that's fine, and it can be enjoyed. And there's people that love them for that. And I do think that this can fall into that as well. It's like, yeah, do you know what? And this is why what I kept thinking about when I watched this, as I said, was Aliens, which I think is a good film. I actually really like Aliens, and maybe one day we'll do that, or Alien at least. But the other one was Tremors. And I'm a big fan of Tremors. I think it's a great film. It's it's one of those films. It's a bit like what you've said. I grew up with that film, and I remember certain things from it. And when I go back to it, I'm like, yeah, probably not as good as I remember it from when I was a kid. But you know what? It's still good fun, and it's exactly the same. It's big worms instead of big ants. And this is this. I think it falls into the same category in that. And again, that's another film that has an unapologetic female, scientist. However, in that she ends up taking her trousers off, but that's a sign of a sign of the times. But yeah, I think this is more like I think I was expecting something akin to Godzilla in that, knowing this was dealing with that sort of nuclear fallout, but with that B movie lens, and it definitely falls more into that B movie lens than a contemplative reflection on, unleashing nuclear hellfire on another country. So, yeah.
I wasn't expecting anything of that. I was expecting giant ants, and I got giant ants. If anything, I wanted more giant ants. And I would love to see a remake with CGI, and make it. I don't want 2 movies. God, I do not want to. I'm so sick of that, and franchises, and put it all on the screen. If you've got the story to tell, put it all on the screen in one movie. If it's successful, then you can do something else, but don't pull your punches for the sequel. But show me the sort of Starship Troopers blood. Show me the gore. Show me, let's watch them escape and brutalize people across LA. I mean, if anything, this is, my love for Mars Attacks. I want to see the ants just destroy human civilization. That's what I want. That's what, and I found myself, it's funny you were mentioning like compassion for the ants. I found myself feeling that. I was like, I wonder if part of this mutation, like, ants have it's incredibly hierarchical, and sort of fascistic, but ants have a very complex society that is a touchstone for animal societies. Does that challenge our society? Are these mutated ants like, if they were able to communicate, what would they say? Like, look, we were encroaching on, your territory. We're giant ants, and, we found these humans, and we killed them. What do you think you guys do? You guys killed a lot more ants than we killed humans. So I felt like I want to see these ants. A, I want to see more humans die, and B, I find my mind naturally goes to exploring the ants' point of view and ant civilization.
That's the thing again. Like you said, it's modernization. This idea, the montage, the terror montage of the ants breaking out through the sewers or breaking out through manhole covers, and I can't think of if you to remain in LA. I don't know. You'd want to see ants crawling across the Hollywood sign or
the Griffith Observatory.
Yes, you'd want to see some monuments covered in the Roland Emmerich approach. Like, let's destroy some monuments, or at least have them swarming with ants. Like, that's what you'd want to see, and then have them killing people in that, breaking through somebody's 10th story window and attacking them or something like that. There is definitely that. Go that way. I think you're right. I think I'd go all out and have it like a horror film, a proper full-on gore fest of that sort of thing. You see at the end of this film, you see the 2 flying ants in
2 new ones.
2 new ones.
New
So,
queens,
yes, right. So you've got flying ants. All right, then let's have let's have some dogfights between fighter jets and flying ants, like a swarm of flying ants. I can tell you now that I don't know if this is just a British thing or what or an American thing. I don't know, but there is usually a day or a couple of days every year when the flying ants hatch out and they are just bloody everywhere. Like the air becomes thick with them, and you will be swatting them off everything. Yeah, and I they're a pain when they're about half an inch long. So if they're going to be 9 feet, I want to see what that means. What they're going to attack. How do they do what? And I say how vicious are those mandibles? What can they bite through? Not just wood, but like steel or whatever. And it's what, as you say, they mention it in this film. It's one of those things of like they talk about how strong a spider's web is, and then in this film, obviously the equivalent is like how strong an ant is, how much it can lift. Cool. What can it lift? I want to see it lifting a bus full of people.
Yes, absolutely. The first thing I thought of when you were talking about attacking LA is like, the Mars Attacks thing of like, we're on a movie set and we're filming something and the ant walks in and it's like, who's controlling that? You're in my shot, and then it rips off the actress's leg or something. Just that joy of violence and carnage, and that's what this movie is, right? It's not about a deeper message. Let's go for it. That would be so awesome watching them, sort of lift the bus and cooperate to menace the bus.
Well, and I think that would be the third act, wouldn't it? Like, you'd have the finale of this film is the ants breaking out, and you'd have the military marching down. I don't know what's a famous street in LA. Just somewhere
Drive or something.
Yeah, you'd have some recognizable place, at the Battle of Beverly Hills or something like that. And then, like you say, it would be like, we're driving them back, and then all of a sudden, no, they've learned, they've strategized. Now they're surrounding us, or they're ambushing us, or whatever. Like yeah, that's when the third act is like we've got to attack them with gas or something like that. We've got to. There's the one people probably call it jokey but extreme, but there's that one general that's like, we've got to nuke them. I'm going to nuke Los Angeles. I'm giving you an hour to eradicate them before I set the nukes off. Give them the ticking clock, and then but then there's a gas alternative, or all this has been done before. It's not new material. This is incredibly cliched. I mean, it's the end of Godzilla. 1998 Godzilla. It's the end of it's the end of Alien versus Predator Requiem. It's it's not new, but I think it would be great fun to see ants doing that.
Yeah. Well, and I think the key thing is keep it fun, minimize the stupid human scenes. Get rid of all human characters. I don't even care. But then also have the ants win. Don't have, just let the ants. I mean, I kept thinking like these two queens escape. You don't know how many. And all we know is we've had flying ants and, then a ship is attacked. I thought it kind of improbable, but that ants chose a ship. But it's still a cool scene when the brief though it is. But I kept thinking, oh yeah, no, civilization just lost, right? Like once it's not contained, it's not contained. That virus isn't going to go back in that lab, okay?
Yes.
The ants reproduce massively at massive rates. You're done. This is just something you're going to be dealing with forever now. Right, don't give me the bullshit like humanity triumphs. No, we're too stupid to triumph. We're going to live with the ants.
Oh, well, we'd be their servants. We're going to live for the ants, I think is. But yeah, I think there's a film to be made. I mean, one of the films, some of the stuff you've talked about. I don't know if you've seen a film called Eight-Legged Freaks, which is a spider film, which maybe we'll visit. But that's played completely for comedy, in that sense. But it's exactly the same thing of giant spiders take over a town. It's very similar. And again, that is 100% B movie, and if anything, it would probably act as a really good companion piece to this film. And there's moments in that where you actually see a spider picking up a beetle, a bug, like Volkswagen Beetle, stuff like that. And so I think, yeah, you could do that and go all out, and you could do it, tonally. But I think, yeah, go for the B movie, but go full on gore and full on
Oh yeah.
carnage, and just have like a 20-minute scene of like ants attacking Los Angeles, and then well, General, we've lost Los Angeles, but we can't let them. We've lost California. How do we keep them there? Well, we're gonna have to, build a massive electric fence, or we're gonna have to cut them off or something. How do there's what do they call it? Ant powder. There's ant poison now, isn't there?
Yeah.
Like I'm assuming they'd have something, but
we don't have the flying ants here, so we don't have that problem. We have the no-see-ums, the little gnats, in the Midwest. But they're occasional flying cockroaches, but it's not very bad. I mean, but I don't identify too much with that. But I do love the idea of just sort of mass carnage with those ants. Really, and the important thing also is to be tasteless. Like, this movie is a B movie, but it wants to sort of it's a 50s movie, right? It cannot transgress quite too much. Transgress,
Yes.
The way to do this is just no, you are tasteless. Embrace your inner John Waters and just go for it.
I would so totally watch that. I think that'd be amazing. I mean, there's a great opportunity out there. Well, they've done it with, it's that thing again of as you said before, that those daft modern sci-fi B movies of Lava Lantula, Sharknado, and all those kinds of things. Ants or them should be in that category of going just going crazy. I mean, I'm sure there are purists who hold this up as an example of a great example of 50s sci-fi. It's sustained. We know about it. It hasn't disappeared. It's often talked about. Well, it's often referenced.
Right.
And I think it's referenced for a good reason. Like we've seen that its DNA has lived on and exists in other films, but it's not like it's a staple of this is having a conversation about the 50s experience, and it's sort of sci-fi making a comment. No, it's just killer ants, giant killer ants.
Well, and I think it doesn't have to be deep to live on. I mean, I think I was thinking of Barbarella and how, everybody knows Barbarella, everybody knows them, right? We know them from the posters. We know them from certain images or just one dumb idea, right? It's a chick with a ray gun, who's sexy, right? It's a giant ant. I mean, these are simple, iconic ideas. The difference is Barbarella's a good movie. I mean, it's fascinating. It holds up in my mind. It's stunning how good it is, especially because you expect it to be a dumb B movie, right? This I expect to be a dumb B movie, and it's a dumb B movie, and it's maybe not as good of a dumb B movie as I want it to be.
No, I think that's fair. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, maybe there's not a great deal more to talk about in this.
Yeah.
So let's wrap this up then. So final thoughts then on them, on 1954's Them.
It's a great idea, but it's a confused movie in its execution. It's fair to say. But look, it's a classic. I've never seen it before, and I'm glad I saw it. What about you?
No, it's the same. I'm glad I watched it because it's one of those films that gets referenced a lot. And like you said, I've known the poster since I was a kid. It's just one of those. I'm very glad I watched it. Confused is probably the best way to describe it. It's there's like you say, whoever edited this film, like you said, I want to see what landed on the editing floor. If what stays in the film stays in the film, and they were like, well, we've got to hit the 1 hour 30 mark. We're going to need to have around 90 minutes. So I'm keeping in these scenes, and you're like, so what have you taken out? Like there's some interesting lines or scenes. It's still got moments of fun, where the film is clearly having fun. But there's also long stretches where I'm like, I'm not entirely sure even the cast really know what the point of this bit is. And also in the middle of it, like you say, is loaded with documentary footage just to remind you what you're dealing with in a PowerPoint presentation, which is bizarre. It's fine. It's good. Of the three we've watched so far, it's clearly it's the lesser of the least of the three.
Mhm.
So we'll be interested to see how it stacks up against some of the others we've got coming up.
Well, I believe we have a treat for you next time.
Yes, I'm going to check my list. I've got to double check it. So what we got? Oh yes, it's Quatermass.
Yes, indeed.
It's the first outing of Quatermass with Hammer. And also this is a bit of a doozy, and we'll get into it in the next episode. This is an American Quatermass. So he was always depicted as British in the TV series, but when it got to the first Hammer outing, they chose an American actor to play Quatermass, and he brings a very different persona to it.
He's got
compared
big
to Andrew
muscles
Kidd.
and a big dick, right?
Yes, basically it's Arnie. It's basically sort of like he's the first action hero.
He's not interested in science or book learning. He uses that phrase a lot.
Yeah, the film ends very quickly when he basically just shoots the alien in the face and starts spouting off one-liners.
He calls everyone around him limeys constantly for no reason.
We will discuss it as to why he's running the British Air and Rocket Association, but that's a different thing. Yes.
Because we got the Nazi scientists and you guys didn't. That's pretty much the reason.
You guys got the Nazi one, so we basically got the American scientists that could no longer get jobs because the Nazis take them all.
Yeah, he learned a little from von Braun and parlayed it into jobs for the RAF.
Yeah, we'd hire anybody in the 50s. We were really sort of like scraping the barrel. No, having watched Andrew Keir in Quatermass and the Pit, it'd be interesting to see how you sort of perceive this version of Quatermass. So yes, looking forward to that. So Quatermass, the Quatermass experiment is what we're going to be doing. So I enjoyed this film. I really enjoyed this film. So it'll be interesting to sort of pick it up. But that's in the next episode. So we shall round it out with that. But so Julian, this has been a blast as always, talking about giant ants and not death hornets or whatever other insects occur. I would say one thing I wanted to say is, if you were to watch this film in Australia, it's just an everyday. I think it's just a regular day, from what I understand of Australia. So
no, that's such an exaggeration. It's not a dingo ate my baby. Okay. There's scary stuff, but still, poor Aussies.
Yeah, the Australia. I've got family in Australia. Never going to visit them. Looks terrifying. But on the next episode, yes, we'll be covering Quatermass, which is a nice, quaint British film. But as for this one, Julian, it's been an absolute blast. Really enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
My pleasure, as always.
And we shall catch you on the next episode.